The lone suspect arrested so far in the Benghazi terror attacks is expected in the U.S. shortly. What happens then? This is Special Report. Good evening, I'm Chris Wallace in for Brett Baer. 21 months after the Benghazi terror attack that left 4 Americans dead, just one suspect is in custody. And that man is about to arrive in the U.S., setting in motion a still unclear path toward justice. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has the latest on tonight's top story.
A senior U.S. official says the Benghazi suspect Ahmed Abu Khatallah will be moved to U.S. soil this weekend, though the Justice Department offered no guidance on the timing, except to emphasize the situation is fluid, and Attorney General Eric Holder will make the call. While Khatallah is being transported by the Defense Department, a Pentagon spokesman punted timing questions to other agencies.
He's in the custody of law enforcement personnel, and all the proceedings regarding Abu Khatallah are being handled by the Justice Department.
Since his capture on June 15th in Libya, Khatallah has been held on the USS New York, where he's been questioned by the high-value interrogation group, which includes FBI, CIA, and Defense Intelligence Agency personnel. And while Khatallah is described to Fox News as the muscle on the ground during the 2012 attack and not the master planner, the Pentagon insisted he is important.
We believe and gathered the evidence to support the notion that he was a key figure in the Benghazi attacks.
While a U.S. official says Khatallah has given his interrogators a history lesson about Ansar al-Sharia, an Islamist group that works alongside al-Qaeda, a former FBI agent who has worked high-profile terrorism cases like Benghazi says his former colleagues have limited options because the suspect was free on the streets for nearly 2 years.
In a situation where there's not an imminent threat, you're more likely to see the investigators throttling back, being more patient in their interview and interrogation techniques.
And while this criminal complaint is a placeholder for a more comprehensive indictment, Gilliam says the emphasis is noteworthy.
It's definitely minimizing terrorism, and it's putting up there more of an attack on a federal building and federal employees. And I find that very interesting because of the politics of what's going on.
While the federal courts in the Southern District of New York and the Eastern District of Virginia have handled the lion's share of post-9/11 terrorism cases, a legal observer explains why D.C. got the case.
Department of Justice run these kinds of cases, so to be able to just walk across the street and see the U.S. Attorney as opposed to flying to Manhattan is a lot easier.
Details of the Khatallah case are on a very close hold, especially the security posture, because they're going to need to move him back and forth between a detention facility and this courthouse, Chris.
Catherine Herridge reporting from outside the Federal District Courthouse in Washington. Catherine, thanks for that. Abu Khatallah is not the only suspect who's been on the radar these past 2 years. Senior correspondent Adam Housley tells us who some of the others are and why they're still at large.
According to multiple sources with direct knowledge of the Benghazi attack and subsequent hunt for those involved, the United States has a target list that initially contained about 10 suspects identified within days and eventually grew to more than 20. The target list is broken down into 4 groups that include members of Ansar al-Sharia, al-Qaeda, and Libyan militants, with the top target being the man described as the emir of Ansar al-Sharia, Abu Sufyan bin Kumu. He was a prisoner at Guantanamo Bay for more than 5 years and was classified as, quote, a probable member of al-Qaeda. Bin Kumu was eventually released as part of an amnesty deal for militants. Sources say intelligence has shown his involvement in the attacks, and actionable intelligence has been ignored. He, along with other more prominent suspects, have been allowed to remain free. These same sources also question why more of the investigation hasn't centered on the Libyan landlord of the American facilities in Benghazi, Muhammad al-Bashari. Some in the region that night insist that al-Bashari, quote, knows a lot more than he's letting on and, quote, is a key connection to everyone else that night. Intelligence officials also agree with special operators in the region, insisting that there are bigger targets than recently arrested Abu Khatallah, saying Ansar al-Sharia is saturating the whole region of eastern Libya. At the Pentagon, Rear Admiral John Kirby countered, insisting the arrest of Khatallah shouldn't be taken lightly.
Let's not lose sight of the big picture here. He's not sipping mango juice anymore on a cafe in Benghazi. He's on his way to court. That's what's really important.
When contacted by Fox News, al-Bashari asserted his innocence and said the United States still owes him money for the damage done to the consulate and the annex the night of the Benghazi attack. Chris?
Adam, thank you. The U.S. is putting some eyes in the sky above Baghdad to help protect its embassy in an Iraqi capital squarely in the sights of Islamist militants. Meanwhile, President Obama is reversing course on arming some of the Syrians opposing that country's leader. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin has that story.
In an about-face, President Obama signaled he now intends to ramp up the training of Syria's so-called moderate opposition after resisting calls to do so for 3 years since the Syrian civil war began. In Saudi Arabia today, Secretary of State John Kerry met with the head of the Syrian opposition, Ahmed al-Jarba, a day after the White House asked Congress for more money. Quote, in particular, we are seeking $500 million for a proposed authority to train and equip appropriately vetted elements of the moderate Syrian armed opposition. The request was larger than expected. Pentagon officials indicated the training would not begin until next year, would last 6 to 8 months if Congress approves the program.
$500 million now is too little, too late. I would characterize it as trying to put oil in your car engine long after the engine is seized.
Until now, the CIA ran a small covert training program in neighboring Jordan. The president addressed the growing crisis in Syria and Iraq during a town hall meeting.
I want to be very clear, we're not sending combat troops into Iraq.
President Obama has not yet authorized the use of force, but on Friday, the U.S. began flying armed surveillance drones over Baghdad.
The reason that some of those aircraft are armed is primarily for force protection reasons. Now that we have introduced into the country some military advisors whose objective will be to operate outside the confines of the embassy.
Iraq's defense ministry issued this video Friday, which it says shows Iraqi military vehicles driving along the main road between Baghdad and the city of Samarra after it claimed to have cleared it of ISIS fighters. Meantime, in Lebanon today, ISIS claimed responsibility for a bomb blast earlier this week at a hotel next to the Saudi embassy, an indication that the Sunni insurgency plans to take its fight to Lebanon.
Our interests are we do not want to see a caliphate organized in eastern Syria and western Iraq where ISIS has a complete safe haven. It's easy to embrace the isolationist argument, but in today's interconnected world, it's just not possible.
Meantime, the top Shiite cleric in Iraq has called on Iraq's political parties to swiftly unite behind the next prime minister before Parliament meets on Tuesday, an indication that Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki's time may be up. Chris.
More on all this with the panel, Jennifer. Thank you. Please join me later tonight for a special look at the crisis in Iraq. We'll examine what is happening now and how we got there in the first place. One of my guests, former Vice President Dick Cheney. How do you feel about bringing Iran into the discussion about Iraq?
Bad idea. The Iranians are, in many respects, the common enemy for a lot of our friends out there. The idea that we're going to welcome Iran into solving the problem in Iraq is like bringing the Russians in to solve the problem in Ukraine.
Fox News reporting Iraq and the rise of a terrorist state premieres tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern, and you can also see it Saturday and Sunday nights. Up next, President Obama says he's not going to stop going around Congress despite yesterday's Supreme Court ruling. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates are covering tonight. WDRB Louisville with the murder of a well-known defense attorney in southern Kentucky. Police say Mark Stanziana was shot multiple times this morning outside his office. A man who reportedly threatened the attorney in the past has been arrested. Fox 23 in Atlantic City with another casino going under. The Mardi Gras themed Showboat will be the second Atlantic City casino to close this year. Also closing, the company's House of Blues concert venue. And this is a live look at Miami from WSVN. A big story there tonight. The death of a construction worker who became trapped in a ditch 25 feet deep. When rescue crews arrived, it took them 2 hours to recover the body. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from